Hey guys, Peter here to do an album review. Today I'm here to tell you about the latest from Arion, Vultures Die Alone, out April 9th on AFM Records. This album has 10 tracks, 43 minutes in length, and this is the band's third full-length studio album. They are a symphonic power metal band from Finland. Now this record has a structure that in my opinion is perhaps the weakest point of the album. It has a little bit of a stop and go, a speed bump, if you will, kind of style to it. You have to reset and readjust with every single track on this record. There's no continuity. It's an album that's not fluid from that perspective. Not because each song pulls you in a different direction, but because each song has a different way of executing itself and therefore giving you a different outcome. In addition to that, the record finishes off with two songs, not back to back, but two songs in the last third that have a lot of similarities to them. One is a semi-instrumental track that brings the mood down musically, and the other one is a ballad that closes off the record. Now these are two songs that by nature take a little bit of the air out of the balloon, that deflate the balloon, if you will. Not sure that putting them in the same part of the record together at the end of the album is the best approach. You want to close off the album as strong as possible to make the listener re-engage himself with the album, go back to the beginning and start listening to it again. The way this album ends, because it ends on such a sorrow note, it ends on such a melancholic note, if you will, it really gives the album a sense of finality, that there's no continuity to it. So you're not necessarily keen on going back to the beginning and listen to the album again, because it just ends in a very depressive kind of way because of how the songs are put together and how they interact with each other and the atmosphere that they put forward. Once you get into the soundscape of this record, you start to see perhaps a little bit better those two sides of the same coin, that Jekyll and Hyde presence that's definitely there throughout the album. On one side you have the more power metal driven tracks with symphonic elements that really create this cinematic approach that make this larger than life presence. On the other side you have a more hard rock pop synth driven tracks that have a different atmosphere, that have a different mood, that lower the intensity of the record and definitely provide a much different outcome as far as the overall soundscape is concerned. So these are the two soundscapes that you have. I don't feel like they necessarily blend well together, at least not on this record, not with this structure. They collided at times and they made things between them feel a little bit abrupt, which hurts the overall fluidity of the album. One thing that stays constant between those two styles and those two approaches is the quality of the sound itself. That doesn't change. The quality of the sound is absolutely phenomenal from the first track all the way to the last. Everything is very crisp, very clear, very clean. You can understand exactly what's coming together in order to paint the full picture that each and every single song has to offer. And for an album that has these characteristics, that has this soundscape, even though it has two different soundscapes, but that it has this kind of a style, having a clear-cut approach, having a clear and concise directive on where you want your sound, how you want to define that same sound is very important. The album definitely achieves that throughout all 10 tracks. Now within the sound there's two driving forces that really dictate where the record goes within the two different soundscapes. One is the keys, the other one is the guitars. The keyboards on the more power symphonic driven songs have more of a cinematic vibe. They have this larger than life presence. They expand the tracks, they make them feel bigger. They give them a lot more depth of sound and depth of presence. On the songs that have more of a hard rock pop synth drive to them, they have a different way of coming together. They permeate throughout the track, they become one of the layers of the track. They almost hide everything else that's around them and they become the sole driver of the experience, but they bring the mood down as well. They bring the intensity down while still becoming melodic, while still allowing the songs to have catchy choruses, catchy tunes, catchy lyrics, but they definitely bring the intensity down, they definitely bring the power down, and you're using the same element but in two different ways to get two different outcomes. The guitars kind of fall under the same pattern. On the songs that are more power driven, that have more of that symphonic power metal sound, the guitars have more bite, they have more of a presence, they jump more into the forefront. You can hear them better, you can see the definition in their sound, in their presence, you can see exactly where they want to take the song and how they're going to get there. On the tracks where you got more of that pop hard rock feel, where the mood comes down, where the intensity is a little bit stripped out and perhaps replaced with emotional drive from the lyrical content, the guitars also lose a little bit of that essence, they lose a little bit of that presence, they lose a little bit of that power. They start to blend into all the other elements that are there, and they become part of the big picture, but not one of the defining elements. And that to me hurts the overall experience and the sense of continuity from track to track. I don't mind the change that the synths give to the tracks, but I would like the guitars to stay a little bit more consistent from song to song in order for the record to have more fluidity, in order for the record to be more connected. One of the elements that stays true throughout is the vocals, perhaps the beacon of this record. Magnificent vocal performance from the first song all the way to the last. Not to say that this was a record that had a one-size-fits-all approach, because it doesn't. It really helped to understand exactly where the songs were going, the dynamic of the tracks, the outcome, the atmosphere, on which side of the coin the soundscape was going to land. Is it going to be more of a symphonic power metal driven song, or is it going to be more of a synth pop hard rock track? So understanding what the song is all about and then delivering the right vocal performance for each of the tracks is exactly what you're going to get on this album. So the delivery changes ever so slight, the tone, the intensity, the emotion that the vocals carry are changing from song to song, but the quality of the approach is absolutely constant from the first all the way to the last song, and I love the vocals on this record. I really feel like the range fits both styles, both approaches, and you really don't lose anything vocally regardless on which side you end up with. Now overall, this is an interesting album, an album that gives you a little bit of what the band has done up until this point and perhaps opens the doors in terms of what the future holds. I think they have to work out a better way of merging these two sides that the band has to offer, or at least create a more clear-cut pathway in which you can travel once you're enjoying a record. The way this album comes together, it feels like they have one foot in the past with one foot in the future, and because of that it becomes a little bit broken, it becomes a little bit disconnected, and doesn't really allow itself to be as dynamic, as fluid, as cohesive as a record should be. Now, as far as favorite songs are concerned, I picked 3 tracks that offer slightly different atmospheres, slightly different looks. Starting off with Break My Chains, which is more of a symphonic power metal driven song, but doesn't have extreme power to it. The symphonic elements of this track create the power, create the presence, because it makes the song feel very cinematic. It increases the size of the track itself, and I like the soundscape that it puts forward. And that is clear to the listener from the opening of the track. From the moment this song starts, you know exactly what you're going to get from the track. You know exactly that this is going to be a very bombastic track, at least from the experience, as far as the experience is concerned. The song is very dynamic, both musically and vocally. The chorus is big, is bombastic, it's explosive almost, musically and vocally, but vocally more intensive than explosive. But the two work really well together in order to make this song one that has great tempo, that pushes itself forward, peaks in the chorus, becoming very catchy, very hooky, if you will, but at the same time staying very consistent in the way it's put together, in the way it starts to all the way in how it ends. Next, I'm Here to Save You. Definitely a more keyboard-driven song that has a lot more pop, hard rock elements. It's not as intense, perhaps more emotionally driven, but definitely not as intense musically and definitely not as intense vocally. It still has a lot of energy in it, but the energy is coming from a different place and it's coming in a different format, if you will. I like how the vocals sound, especially in the chorus, becoming really poppy, really hooky, really catchy, but it works perfectly well in how the song is constructed and then obviously how the song is delivered. The guitar solo is phenomenal. This is a song that feels very pop, very stripped down. So they introduced a guitar solo that brings a lot of bite to the guitars, that brings a lot of heaviness to the way the guitars sound, that brings brightness into the overall track. You needed that dynamic, you needed that change in order to create an unbalance within the track so that the track is not overly balanced, so that you don't feel like everything is happening at the same pace, at the same speed, with the same delivery. Having a more rock-driven power metal style solo in a track that has the complete opposite direction works perfectly well. It allows the song to reset itself and allows the song to feel a lot more dynamic than what it really is. Last but not least, Don't Fear You, I Don't Fear You. This is my favorite song on the record, perhaps the heaviest track on the album. The one where the guitars are not taking a back seat to anything else on it. The guitars are there in the forefront with the drums, creating a lot of heaviness, creating a lot of drive, pushing the song forward, creating momentums, creating the right tempo for the song, but never losing the heaviness that it has. Even when the keyboards come in, and they add melody to how the track comes across. They add layers to the overall experience of the song. I never felt like the keyboards on this track took anything away from how heavy, from how much bite the overall guitar sound has on this song. I love this track. I love how dynamic it is. I love how fluid it is. It just moves, and it always coming at you with a lot of intent. I wouldn't go as far as to say aggression, but definitely a lot of intent, and it has this impetuous feel to it that is always moving it forward and never really slowing down for anything. It doesn't matter if you're in the verses or in the chorus. That becomes almost irrelevant for this track because you're so consumed by the energy that it has and how it pushes it forward that you just magnetize to it, and you just never want this track to end. Like I said, my favorite song on the album. This is it. This is Arion with Vultures Die Alone, out April 9th on AFM Records. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.